Hey, I had right of way here. No, I had right of way here. Why don't you argue with my dinosaur? Ha ha! Why don't you get your dinosaur to argue with my dinosaur? Ha ha!
Oh, hello. At the end of January, there are some significant changes happening to the UK Highway Code. I've been thinking about them, and I felt it might be interesting to take a look and share my thoughts about them. For everyone not in the UK, two things. Firstly, we drive on the left side of the road in the UK, and the driver's seat is typically on the right side of a car. I'm not going to make a mirrored version of this video for people who drive on the right, partly because this video is about the UK roads and UK Highway Code, and partly because just transpose it in your head if you need to. It's not hard. Secondly, the Highway Code is the official rulebook for road users in the UK. It contains guidance, information and rules, many of which are mandatory for anyone using or interacting with roads and road traffic, so pedestrians as well as drivers, cyclists, horse riders and so on. It's available in printed form like this, and also in full online for free on gov.uk. I happen to think that the Highway Code is an example of a very well written and exceedingly clear policy document. The first version of it was produced in the early 1930s, and it's an example, I think, of one of those British public projects where the primary objective was just to deliver the best possible end product. The UK 3-pin mains plug is another example of this same ethic. But let me show you what I mean about the Highway Code. I mentioned that it's a book of rules. Many of these rules are
more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
They've tried to think of everything a road user might need to know or think about, even if it's not legally enforced. For example, let's look at a couple of rules in a section called Using the Road. Rule 173, dual carriageways. When crossing or turning right, first assess whether the central reservation is deep enough to protect the full length of your vehicle. If it is, then you should treat each half of the carriageway as a separate road. Wait in the central reservation until there's a safe gap in the traffic on the second half of the road. If the central reservation is too shallow for the length of your vehicle, wait until you can cross both carriageways in one go. Rule 173 is advice. It's guidance on how to safely use a type of junction. It's not necessarily something that would get you in legal trouble if you don't follow this rule. So why put it there if it's not law? Well, it's in the guide as a prompt for the road user to think about how to do a thing. Nobody's going to think about everything unless they're prompted. So the Highway Code just tries to prompt you to think about everything in a very clear and methodical way. Contrast this with Rule 174, box junctions. These have crisscross yellow lines painted on the road, see road markings. You must not enter the box until your exit road or lane is clear. However, you may enter the box and wait when you want to turn right, and are only stopped from doing so by oncoming traffic or by other vehicles waiting to turn right. At signalled roundabouts, you must not enter the box unless you can cross over it completely without stopping. So this rule is law. This is telling you that you must or must not do a certain thing. And it references the relevant legal codes. And this is the feature I really admire the most. If something in the Highway Code is law, you will always see the words must or must not in bold block capitals. If it's advice and guidance, it might say you may, or you should or should not, or just do or don't. I happen to think this is a superbly clear way to write a policy, and I adopted similar wording when I wrote user-facing policies in my IT management role. You might think this is all overkill, but it's important to note that the design goal of the Highway Code has always been to try to be as complete, comprehensive and useful as possible. Nowhere does it assume that anything will just magically pop into people's heads as common sense. It tries to answer every possible question about using the road, including the questions you might not think to ask. Anyway, 3 of the major changes coming at the end of January in the UK are, and slightly out of sequence for my convenience of discussing them, a hierarchy of road users regarding priority and responsibility. Basically, this can be summed up as bigger and heavier and harder and faster things bear greater responsibility for not causing harm to lighter and smaller and softer things. Personally, I think this makes perfect sense, and I think the only sense in which people might find it controversial is if they misunderstand this as being a statement about right-of-way in a very general sense. Pedestrians taking priority over vehicles doesn't mean that pedestrians are allowed to just wander onto any bit of road and use it in preference to cars, although at the same time it's not okay to drive through a pedestrian just because they're not supposed to be there. Rather, this hierarchy of road users is more about who rightly bears the responsibility of the greatest duty of care based on their capacity to do harm. With great power to do harm comes great responsibility to mitigate that harm. A pedestrian is smaller, softer, lighter and slower than a car. A pedestrian should obviously try to behave in a safe and sensible way, but there's more that a car driver can do to endanger a pedestrian than the other way around, so the car driver should do more to try to mitigate that danger. Eminently fair, I don't have any problems with this. As an embodiment of the above, there are certain specifics about the treatment of cyclists by motor vehicle drivers. For example, a car should not make a turn that cuts in front of a cyclist who's going straight ahead. Honestly, I'm kind of amazed that this is only being explicitly stated now. I thought this was already a rule. It should have been. I mean, it just makes sense that you don't overtake a cyclist and then swerve in front of them, right? There are a number of other related rule changes, such as cyclists being allowed to ride in the middle of a lane if it's safer to do so, which again is just sensible to any reasonable person, I think. Treat a cyclist as if they occupy an imaginary space the size of a car, then deal with that space. Overtake as if you're overtaking the imaginary car-sized space. If there isn't room to do that, you probably can't safely overtake, so don't overtake. The third change is one that I think will cause some problems, and I suppose it's part of the reason why I'm making this video. Cars and other vehicles should give way to pedestrians who are waiting to cross a side road which the motor vehicle is going to turn into. For this one, let's take a look at how that would work. Either you're about to turn left, and there are pedestrians looking like they're about to cross the end of the road you're turning into. Up until now, those pedestrians are expected to check and wait until nothing is coming, then make the crossing. The motor vehicle would just make the turn while the pedestrians wait for a later opportunity. Similarly, if you're just about to turn right into the same situation, normally you would only have to wait for a gap in the oncoming traffic and make the turn. The pedestrians would have to wait. After the end of January, the road users are advised to stop and wait for the pedestrians to cross. So first, I want to look at why this is a good idea, and I hope that both as a sometimes pedestrian and sometimes car driver, I'm being as fair and reasonable as possible. So this is a good idea simply because pedestrians are smaller, softer, slower and more easily damaged than cars. In particular, the speed of pedestrians is a pertinent point. Under the current system where pedestrians give way to cars, you can be standing at this junction, you can look all different ways and see that it's clear to cross, and start walking across, and it's perfectly possible for a car to arrive on the scene while you're still crossing. Now, even without the changes, if you're halfway across the road, the motor vehicle should already give way to you. But this is a situation that often triggers a little bit of road rage. And furthermore, as a pedestrian waiting to cross here, you have to be looking in 3 different directions at once to make sure a vehicle isn't coming. And while you're looking one way, something can be zooming up the other way because, again, cars go faster than pedestrians. Compound this with the fact that not all drivers use their indicators to signal a turn, and even under the current rules, a pedestrian can be under the impression that it's safe to cross when a car driver is actually thinking of making the turn, but considers indicator signals to be sort of optional. The driver is of course wrong about that, but the pedestrian is the one that's in danger. So it does make sense for a pedestrian to have priority in this situation, but I think there are some potential new issues here. For one thing, these changes don't seem to have been publicised as widely as possible. I heard about them, but I'm paying attention. But according to some news sources, only about 1/3 of road users know these changes are coming. That's 2/3 of road users who might not be expecting a pedestrian to confidently step out across that road. That's a bit scary. Waiting to turn right into a road, under normal circumstances, you wait for a gap in traffic and you make the turn. If you're lucky, a courteous driver will slow down and stop, often flashing their lights to indicate that you can go ahead, to let you cross the stream of traffic. Very often this will happen with a driver who's also slowing to make their own turn into the same road as you. There is a sort of unspoken convention here that drivers receiving such courtesy should promptly make use of it, so as to keep everything flowing. So now if we add the pedestrians into the mix with the new rule, Driver A is waiting to turn right into the road. Driver B is intending to turn left into the same road. Driver B stops to allow pedestrians to cross. Driver A, who's primarily been looking for gaps in the oncoming traffic, sees driver B stop before the turn and assumes that driver B is courteously allowing them to turn, which may also be the case, but B is actually first waiting for the pedestrians to cross. A wasn't really thinking about the pedestrians and wasn't looking that direction, and turns promptly to accept the perceived courtesy, right at the same time as the pedestrians exercise their priority to cross. Now, all of these changes are guideline-based, but as I've discussed already, there are aspects of this that might lead to new and different risks, so people should know about the changes. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I think these changes are bad. On the whole, I think they're reasonable, and I think they represent a good and sensible shift towards making people think about doing the right thing, the safer thing, rather than aggressively asserting their own right of way. But what do you think? Let's discuss in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.